right, I'm going to call this meeting of the City of Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Dorothy, will you call roll?
Yes, sir. Bob Waller,
Here.
Garrett Harmon, Michael Siegerman,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
Marty Leonard.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum. Number one on the agenda, Visitor Citizens Forum. Any person with business not scheduled on the agenda is encouraged to briefly speak to the commission. Please fill out the speaker request form and give it to the commission secretary prior to the meeting. The number of speakers will be limited to the first 10, each speaker limited to 3 minutes. No formal action can be taken on these items as the Open Meetings Act requires formal action items to be posted on an agenda no later than 72 hours before the meeting. If formal action is required, the items will be placed on an agenda for a future meeting. Item number 2, the consent agenda. All items listed below in the consent agenda are considered routine or ministerial in nature and will be enacted with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item or items will be removed from the consent agenda and considered separately. Item 2A is approval of the minutes from the May 17, 2018 meeting on page 3 of your packet. And let me know if there's any amendments need to be made or any changes. If not, I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
No second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Passes 5-0. Number 3, public hearing, consideration, and action. Item 3A, public hearing and review of a comprehensive plan. Public hearing and review to include a recommendation concerning the city's adoption of a comprehensive plan known as Kerrville 2050 for the long-range development of the city of Kerrville and its extraterritorial jurisdiction. The comprehensive plan contains provisions on land use, transportation, and public utilities, among other subjects, and will be used to coordinate and guide the establishment of the city's development regulations. Ordinance number 2018-13, file number 2018-020, it's on page 4. Drew?
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. Try that again. Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. Yes, we are here to discuss, have a public hearing, and give a recommendation for the Kerrville Comprehensive Plan. As required by state law, because we have zoning, we have to have a comprehensive plan. And that comprehensive plan is our guiding policies for many of the projects, including land use, capital improvement projects, and other city projects for the next coming 30 years. Last overhaul of the comprehensive plan was in 2002. That plan was updated in 2008. And here we are finishing up a new comprehensive plan, Kerrville 2050. And with that, I'll introduce Mr. Mark Bowers of Kimley Horn.
Chairman Waller and members of the Kerrville Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, my name is Mark Bowers. I am a planner and landscape architect with the firm Kimley Horn and am the project manager for the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan, managing a consultant team made up of folks from Prologue Planning Group, Monica Hyde, who you've seen on many occasions, of Rickard Cunningham. Bill Cunningham has been involved in the process pretty extensively, and then many team members from Kimley Horn. We do appreciate this time today. It's amazing to me that we started this process less than a year ago, and here we are to talk to you about potential adoption of a plan. the overview that we have for you today, we're going to give you an overview of the comprehensive plan process, comprehensive plan components that have been developed, and then have some level of discussion and comment from the community. It's related to that comprehensive plan process. As Drew started discussing with you, a comprehensive plan, the purpose of a comprehensive plan is to address a variety of basic issues and requirements that will affect the community's ability to plan for and achieve its vision for 2050. This plan informs capital improvement planning. It helps coordinate and guide the establishment of development regulations, including zoning and subdivision regulations. And in fact, state law says that zoning should be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. It should be reviewed as zoning decisions are made. So this next diagram is something that I think we showed all the way back when we were interviewing for the project, but we really take this to heart. We believe very strongly that the vision of the community and the vision that moves forward in a comprehensive plan needs to take into account physical opportunities. So in Kerrville, obviously, we've learned a lot from what we've seen, but also from the passion of the community related to the natural resources, the natural beauty, the hillsides, the river, trees. We heard the word riparian habitat many times through the process, but we also believe strongly that it needs to be based on market potential. So many times in the past we would see plans that were developed years ago that looked at physical opportunities and what the community said they wanted to be, but it didn't really look at market potential, and the plan sat on a shelf and there wasn't a lot of success that came out of it. So we really need to start to cater this towards opportunities that the market, real estate market, would respond to deliver products here that are desired in the community. And then finally, the community aspirations, and to me that's what this whole process has been about over the last 9 months or so. We have to meet with the community to hear what this community wants to be and the legacy they want to leave behind for 2050, many for their children and grandchildren. And so that vision really needs to sit in that area where it comes together with physical opportunities, market potential, and community aspirations. And I think we've told you from the beginning that our #1 philosophy is we need to help facilitate the development of the community's vision and the community's plan. And if at the end of the day this was looked at as Kimley Horn's plan or the consultant's plan, then we didn't succeed. I feel very confident that the plan that we brought to you today is based upon what this community has told us through the process. So let's talk a little bit more about that process that we've gone through. We started with community input at a community retreat that took place last fall. It was an extensive session, lasted about 3/4 of a day, but that was really the kicking off point for us to start to ask some open-ended questions about what Kerrville wants to be in 2050, and based on that feedback, that really drove a lot of the process as we move forward. And then we had the steering committee that looked at common themes that came out of that community retreat and a lot of other input that we'd been receiving to be able to provide some preliminary direction on the basic plan and framework for the comprehensive plan. We then came forward with some alternative scenarios to the steering committee. Again, it's based upon things we heard in the community retreat, feedback from the steering committee. We developed the alternative scenarios in response to that, and we vetted those even more with the steering committee. About that same time, several groups of subcommittees started forming to look at specific comprehensive plan components from water, wastewater, and drainage, neighborhoods and placemaking, river corridor and parks. There were multiple subgroups that were meeting, really starting to drill down into the specific action items that should be coming out of this plan and policy direction. So that information was brought back up to the steering committee level for vetting. We continued on for more community input and open houses. We took the alternative scenarios with quite a bit of information that talked about the implications of each scenario from a mobility standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint on this community to get feedback on what were the most desirable aspects of each of the comprehensive plan alternatives so that we could start to form a plan that really built on the best aspects of each of those. At the same time, the subcommittees were working on taking their initial work and starting to develop some guiding principles for the plan, and they brought those back up to the steering committee, as we were also talking to the steering committee about a preferred scenario. Again, that preferred scenario coming out of the work that was done in the community open houses. We then moved a step further into really starting to define the land use and mobility components of the plan. And after that, in April, we took those components out to a couple of community open houses that were held right here at City Hall, again, to get some specific detail and feedback on those components. And there were several changes that were made to both of those plans based upon that feedback that we received. Went back to the steering committee with all of the plan components and the implementation plan, and continued through a series of 3 meetings to make refinements to that information, move the ball a little bit further down the field. And at the end of the day, I think we went through 3 levels or 3 rounds of comments back on the land use component and the mobility component. And at each time, those concerns that were raised, we came back with some plan modifications in an attempt to address those concerns. Where we are today is with the first step of the public hearings. So this is an evening for more community input on how did we do with the plan, did it go the right direction, and were you heard through this process? So the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan, just to drill down a little, it's a result of input from a 42-member advisory committee that met in 9 separate meetings, 7 comprehensive plan subcommittees. There were approximately 70 individuals that met in 3 rounds of meetings. So that's, again, those 7 committees, 3 rounds of meetings, that's 21 meetings that took place with the subcommittees. So the comprehensive plan is a result of stakeholder interviews. There were 40 individual and small group sessions. There were more than 100 participants from around the community and even around the county. We reached out even further to groups that should have a say in what was going on in Kerrville. And then website and social media, online survey and newsletters. And then finally there were 6 community events, the State of the City Address, where there was some high-level feedback that was received. Community retreat, there were 140 attendees to set that very preliminary direction on the plan. February open houses, over 2 nights, there were 250 attendees. April open houses, there were 125 attendees during those 2 sessions. So again, the thing I want to reiterate here to the commission is that there's been extensive outreach in the community. Several people have participated on multiple occasions and really had a hand in leading the development of this overall plan through the facilitated techniques that we developed. So we're going to give you a brief overview of the comprehensive plan components that have been developed at this point in a draft report. And it starts with that overall Kerrville brand. So if you'll recall, we had a branding firm, Civic Brand, that was a part of the team. And they took a look at some of those key words that people use to describe Kerrville, at images of Kerrville, and really developed a brand that is focused on the natural aspects of Kerrville. We started with more blue colors in the brand and the logo because of the river, and folks said, well, you know, it's really more about the green and the blue because of the hillsides and the trees. And then there was a little bit more that was done if you look at the line work in the image, just to start to form the K and the lines that start to create that idea of a K. And it's all about Kerrville coming together, that this plan is an overriding plan that brings everybody together to share with their shared interests for the good of the community. So the second thing we did is we really started to drill down into community priorities. Those were the basis for developing many of the plan components and action items that came out of the plan. So some of those priorities, we were showing the ones that had 75% and higher percentage of folks indicating that they were either important or somewhat important. So the top one was properly planning for, designing, constructing, and maintaining Kerrville's infrastructure. That was a key thing across the board, that there was quite a bit of agreement. But then behind that, at 92%, focusing on quality of life assets to attract economic development. So again, those things that are the natural aspects of Kerrville, the parks, and all of those things that generate the quality of life high quality of life you have here. What can we do to attract additional economic development because of that? Capitalizing on the Guadalupe River for the benefit of the community. And then we heard throughout the entire plan, developing affordable attaining housing in the community. Because that was so important, there was not initially going to be a housing component to this plan, but we came back in the report and took a lot of the input we received on housing and added that as a component. Bringing new jobs to Kerrville, creating an active, attractive, and connected downtown, and then finally improving the tourism infrastructure in the community. So based upon those community priorities and a lot of input that we received about what's the word or phrase that comes to mind when people think about Kerrville, in multiple vision statements that were created at the community retreat at multiple tables around the room. The consensus vision statement is Kerrville will be a vibrant, welcoming, and inclusive community that respects and protects the natural environment that surrounds it, seeks to attract economic growth and development, provides opportunities for prosperity, personal enrichment, and intellectual growth for people of all ages, and does so while preserving the small town charm, heritage, arts, and culture of the community. So you can see many of those community priorities that we heard in the very beginning are definitely a part of this overall vision statement. So that's a bit of background on how we started to develop the plan components and the community input that started to create those and then continued to inform those as we went through the process. We're going to go through a high-level outline chapter by chapter. Some of them will drill down into a little bit more information, and the first one is land use. So you can see on the screen the overall outline of what's included in the chapter. One of the key things that we wanted to include was the previous plan direction and actions. I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding with folks thinking that we were totally throwing out all of the ideas of the previous plan and just moving forward with a totally new plan. And while this is a new plan and new components, we did build it upon many of the aspects of the previous plan. So we thought it was important to bring that forward. The second thing you'll see here is something called place types. That's unique to this plan. Your previous plan started to talk about land use. In this plan, we talk about place types to give this commission a little bit more flexibility as you move forward in looking at zoning cases, understand the intent of the place types, and not specifically identify exactly what should occur on every corner of an intersection, but for instance, a residential place type has some criteria that there might be some neighborhood supporting retail that's appropriate as a part of that place type. And it's intended, again, to provide some flexibility. The second thing that's unique to this is the strategic catalyst areas. So while we look at place types across the community, this plan is very much focused on reinvestment in your existing community. There was so much discussion about infrastructure and the existing community and focusing on that existing community, that became clear to us that that was much of the focus here. We needed to look at reinvestment through these strategic catalyst areas. So as we looked at the previous plan direction, that 2008 plan, one of the things that we found was that it established commercial development along major corridors. It had a strong focus on the CBD. It called for low-density residential in the ETJ areas, and it focused on greenfield development rather than reinvestment in older areas of the community. Since that plan was adopted, there were multiple action items that came out of it that were accomplished. The development of Holdsworth Drive, extended water and wastewater utilities along Harper, numerous wastewater lift stations. It was all about implementing that plan to be able to enable development to occur in those areas that previously might not have seen development. So there was quite a bit at looking at how do we reach out in the areas surrounding the community. A number of other projects, new water distribution main, new groundwater well, a water treatment plant expansion. Again, as I said, all of those to really expand the community's footprint and base. And the key thing to take away from this is the major development areas envisioned in the 2008 plan have been readied for private sector investment. So this plan is really looking at, okay, the city and other entities have taken an action on that plan. We've set the stage for development to come. And so what do we do next? Because those areas are now ready for that development to occur. And that's where this plan really started to focus in on some of those strategic investment areas. So essentially, as I said, this plan translates the previous plan uses to place types that I described a moment ago. Those place types are aligned with what exists on the ground. One of the key things that we wanted to point out is that as we developed the place types, we wanted to make sure that we weren't putting something over an existing developed community that was quite different than what's already there, unless strategically we were looking at a focus area that might have the potential for reinvestment, or in some cases, if property owners wanted to come in and redevelop their property for a higher use. And it identifies locations for strategic catalyst areas, key focus of the plan. So just to give you an example of those place types, each place type that was used in the plan, this one it happens to be for downtown, it has a number of images to describe the type of character, the types of buildings, development character that's envisioned. It has a character and intent statement for each one. Land use considerations that look at the primary land uses that should be allowed, as well as secondary land uses. And then indicators and assumptions related to lot sizes, densities, those types of things. Just those nuances of what's important as you develop within those place types. The key is we wanted to have enough depth and description of the intent of these things so that as good projects come forward for consideration, you really are able to use some of this intent statement and intent direction as part of a evaluation process for projects. And then as we look at the strategic catalyst areas, we've got one example. Each of these strategic catalyst areas are essentially outlined on the overview plan. And let's see if I can show how it works on the screen. Drew showed me earlier. Okay, so strategic catalyst area 2, for example, is the focus of this one. The dotted line is generally showing the properties that are envisioned to be a part of that catalyst area. In many cases, the property that is there is a developed property. For instance, Peterson Hospital is part of one of the catalyst areas. The intent is that you're starting to develop opportunities for infill development around a major institution or a major economic catalyst, economic driver like that are supporting to make that area even stronger and make that entity, like the hospital, even stronger than it is today as an economic driver. So each of these areas also start to have defining characteristics. They have allowable place types that would be allowed within each of these districts, place type distinctions, size of each of these areas, the developable sites. So the blue hatching that you see on the screen are actually looking at those sites that are either undeveloped or perhaps are underutilized to the standpoint that they might be ripe economically for that property owner to look at redevelopment to have even more economic benefit from it. And then also the other thing you'll see is that we've indicated on all of these maps, because of how important it is that we understand the terrain in this area, that where you see those developable sites, the green and yellow shading that's on those is showing those slopes. So where there's a severe slope, we want you to really have a clear indication of some of the constraints on these sites. And then it starts to talk about the types of jobs that are being, residents and jobs that are being trying to be attracted to the area. So one of the things that we showed in a public meeting, and it is actually a part of this plan, is the 2018 and 2008 plan comparison. I've talked about many of those things, but in a nutshell, what we did is we took those areas outside the city limits, and we looked at those first and said, have any of those developed with a development pattern since that last plan was adopted? And if it had, then we put in a place type that was in alignment with the development that occurred in that area. We then looked at the remaining areas and put in place a place type that was very much in alignment with the place types that were out there previously. And then as you moved into the city, we took a similar approach in looking at development patterns, existing development on the ground. We applied the place types that were appropriate to accommodate the development that was already there. And if there was new development that took place, then we looked at that previous plan and started to work from that standpoint with what the future development pattern might be from a place type. So much of the plan, even though the colors are somewhat different, are very much in alignment with that big idea and direction of how development overall should occur in the community. And then we drill down. The difference you'll see as you compare those two plans is those white areas that are circled on the map that each then have a more detailed description. So that's the overview of land use. Some of these we won't go into as much detail so that we can get to the public hearing. Economic development. So essentially what we'll show on many of these is the outline of the chapter. So in this case, the introduction, current economic development initiatives, but then we broke it down to talk about people, the types of people that are being attracted to the community, sites and buildings that are able to be accommodated, those sites that are already ripe for investment, incentives and business support, infrastructure, but then also quality of life is a key component, we believe, to economic development. So we had some verbiage related to quality of life that you can build upon to tell that economic development story, market opportunities, and then finally guiding principles and sample actions. And then as we talk about those guiding principles, essentially the guiding principles for economic development were broken down into three key areas. The overall approach to economic development that had multiple guiding principles. Number one, as an example, is support a more holistic approach to economic development, housing, and quality of life for people of all economic strata. The second category was economic development infrastructure. So not only infrastructure on the ground, but also provide access to creative sources of capital for businesses, the business environment, the business infrastructure in place. And then finally, the third category was key industries and assets. An example from that is create an identity for Kerrville as the capital or hub of the Hill Country. So many of those specific guiding principles came out of work of the subcommittees and then additional work with the steering committee. And then those action items that we mentioned to a great extent remained intact the way they were worded from the advisory committee. And all of those have been incorporated into the overall report. So the second component is housing. Again, this is a component that was not initially a part of the focus, but it became so important in this community that we broke it out as a separate component. So it's a little bit more brief. It talks about the current housing conditions, market opportunities in Kerrville, has quite a bit of data related to the market and some of the issues related to the attainable housing from the price points, the cost of land. There's some description in there related to that. And then guiding principles and sample actions related to housing as well. And again, there was, on housing and neighborhoods, there was just the one category, but some of the key guiding principles were balance the city's tax base, shifting the burden from residential properties so that the commercial and industrial properties are able to support a little bit more of the tax base. And then, let's see, another one that was very important was provide a diverse range of housing options to meet the needs and desires of all age groups, income levels, and lifestyles. So as we continue on, The third chapter is community and neighborhood character and placemaking. Again, all of these had an introduction. This then had existing conditions in the Kerrville 2050 plan related to existing community and character. And then placemaking and strategic catalyst areas, a little bit more focus on that. As we talked about the existing conditions in Kerrville for placemaking, there was focus on existing neighborhoods, on new neighborhoods that will develop in the future, but also on a lot of your commercial areas and commercial corridors especially, with some guidance as to how you create, maintain that community character in those areas. And then as we get into the guiding principles and action items, there were three overriding themes. One was a community for all. We heard a lot about promoting aging in place or full cycle amenities to address the needs and desires of children, teens, young families, and single professional adults, as well as empty nesters and others. The key is we've heard that this community wants to be a community where people can come here, be born here, and stay here for all of their lives, and they don't have to leave the community at any point. And if they do leave the community, that there's opportunities to come back. Promoting neighborhood appearance and upkeep. One of the key things here was promoting design that's in keeping with Kerrville, its natural beauty, history, culture, and diversity, using art, landscaping, and other aesthetic features, including random order, sameness that doesn't seem forced, encourage design that promotes interaction, a sense of community and gathering. Again, these are overriding principles, but it packs in a lot of detail on the types of things that this community aspires to be. And then finally, neighborhood connections. One is promote walkability and complete streets, focusing on community health and the review of new development proposals. So as we talk about walkability, there's some overlap there with the mobility and transportation. We'll go into this one a bit more. So this chapter actually has an introduction. There's quite a bit of information that falls under the category thoroughfare plan, and then guiding principles and sample actions. So as we talk about the thoroughfare plan, when we kicked that off, there were a few key things that we looked at. We looked at your existing thoroughfare plan and did an assessment of that related to connectivity issues and opportunities, as well as new areas that might need to be served in the future. But we also looked at some of the constraints in place, topography, floodplain, private gated streets, and we looked at alignments and connections that would be compatible with future development. That plan that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen is actually that draft thoroughfare plan as it stands today. As I mentioned, we had several iterations of this plan. We brought it to the open houses, got a lot of comments. We came back and made changes based upon those comments. We highlighted those comments on the plan and brought it back to the next steering committee meeting to say these were the changes that we made to the plan. There were additional concerns. We went back and did everything we could to address those concerns. We highlighted those, brought them back to the point that we do believe this plan has been vetted pretty significantly in the community. So in addition to that overall thoroughfare plan, we also looked at components of your existing plan, such as your street types and cross sections. That example on the right hand of the screen is an existing typical cross section from your plan. That plan, we looked at, it designed applications for new and established thoroughfares, and it aligned with the goals for multimodal trip options and healthy lifestyles. Those were a couple of the key things that we wanted to accomplish with the thoroughfare plan. You see the note on there, the alternative cross-section considerations. One size does not fit all. Your previous plan, and everybody was doing it when that plan was adopted, would just say, okay, if you have 60 feet or 50 feet of right-of-way, this is how you would align things within that right-of-way. It didn't take into account that you might have 60 feet in a downtown area, and then that same thoroughfare may have 60 feet as it gets into a more suburban or even rural area. So what we suggest is that from a one-size-does-not-fit-all standpoint, that we need context-sensitive street design. So what this plan has done is started to add context in how those streets might change in character as they go through different character zones. The one on the screen is actually showing how that 60 feet might be applied in a downtown area versus the upper right image of that generic image that was used before. In the downtown setting, again, what we've heard is we need wider sidewalks with an emphasis on walkable streets, a little bit narrower travel lanes so that people realize it's a pedestrian area and won't be speeding through the area. Intuitively, they'll slow down a bit, and pedestrian scaled streetscape and parkway design, whereas this next image is looking at a multimodal street with an on-street bikeway. This might be in a more suburban portion of your community where that same right-of-way may have the same number of lanes, but you may take some of the sidewalk and reduce it a bit and have a bike lane on one or both sides. Again, just looking at multiple options that you would have to choose from depending on the direction of the plan. So implementation topics, again, they were grouped into safety and quality of life, maximizing the existing street network, and connectivity and transportation options. Under safety and quality of life, the top one was promote a safe, reliable, sustainable, and affordable transportation system. And then maximizing the existing street network. Again, this plan is focused on looking inwardly and how do we reinvest in our existing community at the same time that we're looking at the new development that's already been enabled through previous infrastructure projects. So place a high priority on the maintenance of existing streets and consider policies and technologies that mitigate traffic congestion and improve traffic flow. So wastewater and wastewater and drainage. Again, water supply and water quality is one of the key topics, wastewater management, stormwater management, and then the guiding principles and sample actions. The water supply and quality, wastewater management, each of these are topics, and then the third topic area is education and innovation. So I'm going to drill down in that one a little bit because there's so much discussion in the community about adequate water supply going forward, and we strongly believe that yes, you need to keep your eye on that, and it's very focused on maintaining that water supply, but one of the best ways to maintain that water supply for future generations is to through an education process related to not wasting water and things that you can do to make sure that by minimizing the use of water and the people that are already here, that is part of the solution going forward. Public facilities and services. So again, that's talking more about city facilities, libraries, police, fire, emergency facilities. So again, public services, public facilities were two of the key headings in the chapters, and then the guiding principles and sample actions. So under public facilities and services, there were two key overriding topics, efficiency and effective service delivery in public facilities and the built and natural environment. So one of the ones under efficient and effective service delivery placed the highest priority on public safety, police, fire, and EMS. And one of the key things that came out of the public facilities and built natural environment was be thoughtful when considering land uses that provide facilities and services that promote and enhance parks, green spaces, and the river trail. And as we talk about that, we're rolling into the parks, open space, and river corridor, existing conditions and plan implications, guiding principles and sample action items. The three key areas here were respect for the natural environment. That was, again, in keeping with the overall theme we heard from day one. Let's make sure that this natural beauty we have that's attracting people here, that we do what we can to maintain that for future generations. Regulations and funding, and finally connecting peoples and places. So under the respect for the natural environment, identify, educate, and promote the use of natural and native flora and fauna on private property and in public spaces. Regulations and funding, update the parks and master plan and other applicable codes and ordinance, and capital planning and funding priorities to support Kerrville 2050. And then finally, downtown revitalization, introduction, investing in downtown, and then the guiding principles. Related to downtown, there were 4 key things: the overall character of Kerrville, and really your downtown is the epitome of that character that we've heard people think of, the way the buildings are developed, just the overall atmosphere and its relationship to the river as well. So create a living room for the community and a front door for visitors, a full-service destination that attracts anchor uses and increased residential and mixed-use development. The second one, gathering places and events. Encourage and program downtown public events and create more gathering places to promote and enhance downtown as an arts, culture, and music center. Mobility and connectivity. Promote a walkable, usable, uniform, and pedestrian-oriented public space linking downtown to the surrounding neighborhoods through streetscape elements, access, connections, and crossing. So in other words, we don't want downtown to be standalone. We want it to be integrated and totally connected with the rest of the community, especially the surrounding neighborhoods. And then finally, downtown investment and reinvestment. Promote preservation and reinvestment in single family and historic components of the areas around and near downtown. And I wish we could go through every one of these and every action item because, again, all of these came out of the community process, but they are all in the report. So implementation. That particular chapter, and it's the final chapter, is an introduction to implementation, kind of an overview, and then it includes an implementation matrix, or an overview of the implementation matrix, conclusions, Kerrville 2050 guiding principles by plan topic, and finally it's probably about 80 to 90 pages. I didn't count exactly. 80 to 90 pages of matrices with specific action items related to each topic. So let's walk through that a little bit more. I won't take you through all 80 of those pages, but the matrix overview, it has the guiding principles, and within each of those guiding principles, as we started to show you, it has themes or concepts, and then it has specific action items. Again, all of these came out of subcommittees into the steering committee, and were vetted through that process in that way. The action items talk about responsible parties for each action item, timing of each action item, relative public sector cost of each action item, strategic growth area that's supported by each action item, and community priority addressed. Again, we're taking everything back to those first priorities that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation. So from a timing standpoint, when we talk about the timing on these matrices, the general time frame for initiating an action defined here in relative terms. So if there's an S in that category, we say it's a short term, so it's something within 0 to 5 years that should be initiated and taken on. Midterm would be a 6 to 10 year time frame, and then long term would be more than 10 years. Now, relative public sector cost. Some of these are really low-hanging fruit. They're short-term with low cost, or in some cases almost no cost. So as we prioritize some of these things, we took that into account. So a $1 sign indicates it's a project or action which can be completed at relatively low cost, usually because a large part of the work will be done by the city using staff resources, or in some cases, it may be other partners in the community. $2 signs, projects or actions such as planning, engineering, or urban design studies, costing up to $150,000. $3 signs get more into things that include land acquisition or construction. We're getting from $150,000 to $1 million. And then $4 signs indicate projects or actions that are really capital projects with an approximate cost of more than $1 million. So that's how we've broken it out. An example of that matrix, and again, we tried to make it as user-friendly as possible, but also to become something that can be looked at, checked off, referred back to through the years to see, if there's a report card or something, see how the community is doing. So the first one is just an example from downtown revitalization. So you see those overriding guiding principles that I went through. That first one I just talked to you about is create a living room for the community and a front door for visitors, a full-service destination that attracts anchor uses and increased residential and mixed-use development. So now we start getting into the specific action items. So D1 was the overall principle. So each guiding principle has a designation like that, and then each of the action items would be, in this instance, D1.1, D1.2. So let's look at D1.1, proactively address code enforcement issues in the downtown area. That responsible party would be the city. Timing would be S, so it would be short term, but it would also be an ongoing activity. It's not just something you go do in the first year and then stop. And then it's from a relative public sector cost, it's $1 to $2 signs. So what we're saying is it's relatively low costs all the way up to $150,000. And then we get into the strategic catalyst area. In this case, we're talking about downtown, so it would be Catalyst Area 1. In some of these topics, you see that it's citywide, or it may be multiple areas that are showing up. And then the priorities addressed, we have the terminology there, the coding to indicate those specific priorities. But each of these are tied back to a community priority. So that is an overview of a plus 400-page document that you have in front of you. And we'd like to turn it back to you, Chairman Waller, for any comments or public hearing.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much.
Can we ask Mark a question, Bob? Can we ask him a
If you'd
question?
like to.
Mark, give us your idea about what your thought is on the participation by the citizens in Kerrville compared to some of the other projects you've done. Do you think it was a low participation, a high participation? What do you think?
I would rate it as outstanding participation. Now, throughout the process, we did see a lot of familiar faces. There were people that got engaged day one and had a passion for it and stuck with us all the way through this process, and they're to be commended. There were other people that heard about it as it went along and joined the process. There were others that might have had a concern about a specific topic. As we moved through, we might have addressed that concern, and they chose to drop out of the process. At the end of the day, the numbers that I showed you early on, we have done those types of community retreats, or sometimes we call it a community charrette or workshop, in communities that are probably 8 times your size, and didn't, in those cases, we might get 80 to 100 people at a work session that lasted that long. Much of it was because of the length of time commitment that was required. And I think at that one we said, that first one I think we said it was about 160 people. So for a community that's 8 times smaller than some of the other communities, the outpouring of people was just overwhelming for us. I think there has only been one project I've worked on before where we had that kind of turnout, and it was not in all meetings, in a couple of meetings, and it was a community that was over 1 million people, and it was probably similar types of numbers that showed up for an event.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, this particular item calls for a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing at 5:19. Anybody wishing to make comments to this commission in this regard will need to come to the podium, state your name and address. And what I'll do, I have, 8 or 9 speaker forms. The people that did fill out a speaker form are going to get the first opportunity to speak. And each of these talks, we're going to ask you to hold it to 3 minutes. We'll time those. We won't cut you off mid-sentence. But just be conscious of the time. And I know we have 8 or 10 that want to speak. And then we'll open it up after that to anyone else that wants to make comments. So the first name I'm going to call is Lipscomb.
David Lipscomb, 909 Lake Street here in Kerrville. I have the pleasure of being involved a little bit in the comprehensive plan, the prior one, as well as this one, and I've got to say, it was very exciting, and I'm for it 100%. I think it's a great plan, and I say go forward. Thank you.
David, thank you. Mary Lee Stewart.
I am Mary Lee Stewart, and I live at 600 Meredith Street. My house was built before 1900, and my family moved into it in 1940 when I was 5 years old. I've told you everything now. No, I think comprehensive is an excellent plan. I've seen the blurb on TV that made it sound like it was going to be all open hills and beautiful scenery, etc. And I've been told via the grapevine that there are some things that we need to know about, requiring city inspections. And I want y'all to answer my questions, please, because I live in an old house that's fallen down with the porch that's fallen down. And I feel like I need some protection from the city in my own home. And I don't like feeling like government in my house, you know, that feeling. So I'd like to know more about what's going to happen. Somebody was showing me on the plan that it almost sounded like Nazi Germany and the Jews, where y'all were going to have a phone number where people could call to complain about somebody's yard or their porch or whatever. And that's not what I think Kerrville should be. I was born here, and you know what I'm saying. My porch is quite large, and it's covered, and it's falling down, and has high steps. Now, if this plan goes through and the city then follows up with rules and regulations, can somebody tell me to fix my porch and my steps? If so, who's going to pay for it? You know, this is where this part of this plan makes me nervous. And I think that's everything. I know it's a guideline, but can other people call and say, my roof's leaking, or somebody's roof is leaking? Tell them to fix it. You know, I just don't want the government in my home.
Well, I think, at least what I've seen in the city, I've been here about 17 years now, is they're going to offer access for the comments like you want to make, and they will refer you to the proper areas of the city for answers to those specific questions.
Okay.
I think that might be a question for Drew.
Yes.
Can you address that, Drew?
Yes. Currently, the city does have proactive and reactive
Right.
code enforcement.
Right.
There has been discussion as part of the implementation item, the implementation plan, to adopt property maintenance codes. But that'll be another project that the city will look at through public hearing process as well. That doesn't mean that someone can call and have city come out and work on your house or anything, but could be part of that process depending upon the case by case.
That's always a problem when it's case by case, isn't it?
Understandable.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Stewart. Judy Eichner.
Judy Eigner, 604 Cardinal. I just wanted to say that I have supported this. I have pushed for it. I have been excited about it for several months, and I have not changed my mind. I'm still there. And I think one of our biggest jobs is going to be in our implementation is going to be kind of like the lady who just talked to us, answering questions and managing expectations of the public. But please don't let that interfere in your decision at all. And I just want to say, yes, let's do this and let's get to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Kathy Wilson.
Hello, my name is Kathy Wilson. I live at 117 Crestwood. And although I'm here more for the next agenda, I feel it relates to this because you talk about adding housing in this plan somewhere, and the next agenda item is talking about an apartment being built in a backyard. And it does change the property values. And so I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed with the comprehensive. I'm in agreement that we need to grow Kerrville, but we need to look at how we do it and how it affects people that are already here. And so with that, I'll just say I'll wait until we go over the next agenda item to go into my items more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Francis Lovett.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for allowing me 3 minutes. And my address is 6749 Highway 27. It's a comfort address, but I live in Kerr County, and it's very near Center Point. So I apologize that I'm coming to this discussion late, but everything I heard about the 2050 plan is that it was a Kerrville plan. And when I realized that the ETJ was also involved a couple of days ago, I took a closer look at it. And I would like for you to know that I have two concerns regarding the 2050 plans. Area 11 and its adjoining ETJ. The first concern is water. Industry in general requires more water, and Area 11 and its adjoining ETJ has the most compromised water source in the county. Any new industry locating along the Center Point corridor cannot be assured a stable water supply. During the summer months and drought periods, the aquifer levels do not drop evenly across the county. Decreasing water levels appear first in the Center Point corridor and draw down as fast, a fact established by Headwaters test well history, water purveyors, and longtime residents. Would it not be better to spread industry over more dependable water sources across the city and county rather than compromise current and future investment over uncertain water supplies in Area 11 and its ETJ? The second concern I have about the plan is the air quality. A drive along Area 11 and its ETJ gives an idea of current air quality. What you see are dust and dirt clouds. They are a problem, yes, but not the main problem. The greatest concern are small particulates being produced by current industry within this ETJ corridor. Small particulates consist of silica, hydrocarbons, water vapor, and droplets, and this is what's being produced within by the current industries within the corridor. TCEQ air quality permits limit large particulate emissions, that is contaminants above 10 microns. The naked eye can see particles of 10 microns. Okay, sorry. I could leave you all the rest of this. I'll just leave it for you. Would you like for me to do
Yes,
that?
ma'am, please.
If you would, please. Thank you for your comments. Walt Koenig.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chairman Waller and Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. My name is Walter Koenig. I'm President and CEO of the Kerrville Area Chamber of Commerce, 1700 Sidney Baker, Kerrville, Texas. As a community, we've come a long way in the definition of our future. The creation of the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan has spanned nearly 9 months and has included the contribution from large numbers of a broad cross-section of our community. The development of the plan itself was unprecedented in terms of transparency and community involvement. There were scores of meetings held to gather input from the community, and literally hundreds of community members turned out to contribute to the process. To reiterate a point that I think is important, according to the consulting firm that's facilitating the development of the plan, this level of community participation is rarely seen, even in communities much, much larger than Kerrville. The steering committee voted to approve and to move this plan to the ratification process with 0 dissenting votes. And the Chamber is very encouraged by the level of community consensus that is driving this plan forward. Coming together with a common voice and a unified vision of the future is not only good for business, but it's good for the community as a whole. As of June 5th, and based on a formal resolution from our Board of Directors, the Kerrville Area Chamber of Commerce, representing nearly 1,000 area businesses, officially endorsed the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan. We do appreciate the opportunity to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on this very important topic. Given the great level of participation and the broad agreement on the quality of the final product, the Kerrville Area Chamber of Commerce furthermore requests a vote that reflects the high level of community-wide consensus demonstrated to date. We support and request full and unanimous ratification of the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan. We appreciate very much working with the Planning and Zoning Commission and look forward to continuing to work together over the coming months and years to realize the goals and objectives defined by the community within this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank
Walt.
you, Walt.
Charlie McElvain.
Good afternoon, Chairman Waller and Commission members. I am Charlie McElvain. My address is 2108 Sidney Baker. And we as residents of Kerrville are privileged to live and work in a community that has more potential than virtually any other city in Texas, and making our city even more attractive to visitors and potential investors that can create new opportunities for our city and its citizens. Today we stand at the threshold of an exciting opportunity for the future of our city. That opportunity is the implementation of the Kerrville 2050 Comprehensive Plan. This plan includes 9 months of study, discussion, and feedback generated by 42 dedicated residents that served on the steering committee, who were individually appointed last October by each member of the City Council and the Mayor. And then approximately 70 stakeholders participated throughout the meetings, with 7 subcommittees that were covered by Mark on the various components. The plan focused on 11 strategic areas in Kerrville that were most likely poised for future growth, and this approach involved and was endorsed by the community over the course of 5 public meetings and other opportunities for input involving hundreds of Kerrville stakeholders. Throughout my career, I've been involved in strategic plans in other communities, but no other community, large or small, has been more comprehensive, more transparent, or more inclusive than Kerrville and the Kerrville 2050 plan. I urge each of you to take a giant step forward today for Kerrville and its future with a positive endorsement for Kerrville and the Kerrville 2050 plan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Charlie. Julie Klink.
I would like to wait for
Okay, thank you. Mayor Bill Blackburn.
Bill Blackburn, 809 Bluebell. I was vice chairman of the 2002 comprehensive plan for the city of Kerrville. It was a plan that won a statewide award from city planners. But I will say to you that this plan, and I've been a part of one of the subcommittees and attended many of the meetings, this plan is far more comprehensive. There is more citizen input behind it. There is more data behind this and trend analysis, and including looking at what other cities are doing. And I believe it is a very excellent plan for us going forward. And the implementation, the question always comes with a comprehensive plan, will it be implemented? I will tell you from the position of the city council, the city manager and staff, and those who've been a part of this, we're going to see this implemented. One other comment I want to make. Question has been raised about gentrification of certain neighborhoods, and specifically the Doyle School area. I will tell you that I have worked in that area for 17 years in partnership with the residents there in community betterment. I was the individual who, with foundation money, worked the sale of the historic black school, Doyle School, from the KISD so that it was turned into a community center. And my first day of knocking on doors in the mayoral campaign was in that neighborhood with an African-American man that grew up there. I have a real concern. Now, I have a deep love for the area, but could gentrification happen there? It could if some developer came in and with a bunch of money and wanted to start buying houses and that kind of thing. And the concern is folks that might sell but wouldn't have then the money to get adequate housing elsewhere. Okay, gentrification could happen, yes, but this comprehensive plan does not encourage that. It encourages the intact neighborhoods and the history of those neighborhoods, and far more community involvement for the residents there and elsewhere to maintain the excellence in their neighborhood. So I think that is not a significant issue.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that's all the speaker request forms I have. Anybody else that would like to speak before this forum in this regard? If you would, come to the podium, state your name and address, please.
Good evening, my name is Kimber Falkenberg. My address is 1100 Donna K. And I want to first say thank you very much to the city. The city staff did an incredible job from my perspective as a resident of this community with the comprehensive planning process. I also want to thank Chairman Waller and the commission for allowing us to speak and participate in this process this evening. I never in my life would I have imagined that I'd be speaking in a planning and zoning meeting. I mean, my life took a turn for the worse. No, I'm sorry, no offense. I was a participant in the community retreat in September, which was a very long day, yes. In the online surveys, in the subcommittee for community neighborhood character and placemaking, as well as 2 of the open houses. I think it has been an impressive process, to say the least. I have owned a property here in Kerrville, and I am a business owner. I'm a solopreneur. If you haven't heard that term, it means I work for myself and I do it all.
I like that.
My business is doing work over the interwebs because of what I needed to have as income in order to live in this community. I'm particularly interested in this plan because it lays forth from my perspective, my interest in whether or not I want to continue residency here and raising a family here. I am a huge proponent of this plan, and I also, as a member of that subcommittee, Community, Neighborhood, Character, and Placemaking, want to speak to what Mayor Blackburn just stated around gentrification. That is a community concern of mine. I lived on the east side of Austin, where gentrification did take place over the past few years. I lived on the far east side, where they learned from their experiences that it wasn't necessarily bad for change or development to happen, but it was really the process by which that change took place that made the difference. I lived in a community that was a great mix of the folks who had been there for many, many years and those of us who had recently located to Austin. I think it's possible that we can do that in this community, and as a member of the committee, I brought this up repeatedly with several other members, and I felt very confident in the conversation that took place, and I feel very confident in what's been laid out in the plan for you guys today. So thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, thanks, Kimber.
Thank you for your service.
Yes.
I urge your oversight as we move forward as well.
Keep watching.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak? If not, seeing none or hearing none. Oh, there you are.
Mary Ellen Summerlin, 105 Turnberry Circle. I copied off some of these guiding principles as I was reading the plan, and there's so much in this plan to absorb that it's easy to get the wrong impression. But guiding principle 6 under community and neighborhood character says, celebrate and honor the character of each neighborhood and its culture, revitalize neighborhoods and create gathering places within them while avoiding the displacement of citizens and their cultures. The plan really does provide a lot of protections for individuals. The housing sections, guiding principle number 2 says maintain the quality and the value of existing neighborhoods. So I think some of the concerns that have been raised today can be answered within the plan itself as it already stands. But I realize it's complicated to read the whole thing and remember where all these places are. What struck me the most was the amazing creativity of those action items. I just got excited when I started reading the list of things those subcommittees generated about what we could do with downtown, what we could do about community placemaking in other parts of town. It's really neat to know that there's so many good ideas out there among our citizens. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir. That's okay, thank you.
That's 1 minute less, Bruce.
Just 1 minute. That's probably all I need. Bruce Strakey, 615 Earl Garrett. One of the things that I wanted to note, in addition to all the participation, is that I'm so pleased to see that the community's gone through a really interesting election, and that this process started with the former city council. And while we don't know what the the new city council is going to do, what we have seen is that across staff and across the different boards and talking with business people around town, no matter which silos or which opinions or which views we have, I'm seeing broad consensus. And yeah, I've heard that there are some issues, and I can pick out some issues and point to some details that need to be tweaked and worked on. But when you talk to people about the broad consensus of the plan, no matter what side of the election or what side of business, or if they, if they're looking for, retiring here, or they're a young person who's wanting to start a business and see more activity, there's broad consensus, and that is really wonderful. And I just want to commend everybody who's been involved in the process, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of it.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it.
To the right.
Yes, ma'am. No, thank you.
Barbara Burton, 235 Guadalupe Street. I served on the River Corridor Subcommittee, and anybody in this room that knows me knows that my passion is environment and to try to protect it. And it took some doing, took some hard work and arm twisting, but finally got the language included in here that will protect that riparian buffer. Without this river, we would simply be Fort Stockton, and nobody wants to go to Fort Stockton. So it's really important. I don't know if I'll be here in 30 years, but we've got language now that hopefully will help protect that river. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service, too.
Oh, that's good.
Is anybody here from Fort Stockton?
Yeah, did we just offend anybody from Fort Stockton?
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Delane Sigerman, 4,000 Comanche Trace. I wasn't sure if council members could actually address you, but thank you for letting me speak, Chairman and Commissioners. I do believe timing is everything, and during that election time, all of us had a chance to hear the feedback and the input firsthand. So it was extremely timely, hopefully. Now that we heard it firsthand and we see it in print, we can work to implement some of these great ideas that have come out of it to protect, improve, and build, and keep Kerrville moving forward. I commend everyone who had a part in it. It did take a lot of volunteer hours, and the city for having the wherewithal to hire our consultants. Without them, I don't think we could have stayed on track, and they did keep us on track and kept us going forward. So I'm in favor of this plan, and it is a plan. Let's just keep that in mind. It's a great one. Thank you.
No, thank you for your comments, and look forward to you helping implement it. Anybody else? We don't have a time restriction. If you have a comment to add to this, be happy to listen. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just want to reiterate a couple of things that have already been said. First of all, this is not a zoning ordinance.
No.
It's not a law, and the action items that are in the plan that would affect personal property and that type of thing, they would have to come up before council or a board or something and go through a public hearing process just like we're going here. And so if things change, it's a long time till 2050, I won't be here. But if things change, the plan can change. I mean, the plan is set up to be flexible. It is set up like people have said, to preserve the small town charm of Kerrville. I mean, if they try to cut down the tree that's in the middle of one of our streets that I just love, I'll be one of the first ones down here to fight that, you know. So this isn't the end, it's a beginning. Thank you.
No, thank you for your comments. Any other speakers? Hearing none or seeing none, I close this public hearing at 5:48. What I'd like to do is allow each of our commissioners that are here today to make a comment before we get into any kind of questions. Start with Marty.
Well, this has been something we've been working on for a long time. As many people have said, it's been a pleasure to work on this, getting involved with different age groups, demographics of the city, hearing all the different concerns that were brought forth. And I agree with the last few statements that were made that this is a good plan. If you look back at 2002 and you read that plan, the first thing that when we got that copy of 2002's plan, there was a lot that wasn't done in that plan. And there was many reasons why for that 2008 financial crisis and other decisions along the way. So for me, this is a plan that we're putting forth that is a guiding point. It is not an enforcer. It is not something where Mr. Hayes or an attorney can say this is law, that means you have to do it. So I think that it's been an amazing process to be a part of. I know that my intent is to be here in 2050 to see it through. And I think it's a good plan for my family, for young families, and I'm looking forward to seeing it implemented by the city council and future city councils. So,
First of all, I'd like to really stress what Ms. Liscombe said. This is a comprehensive plan. It's a guide for the future. It is not a law. It's a living document that will change as time goes on, as things that happen in this city dictate. But it's a tremendous guide, and I would like to thank everyone that's here today. I would like to thank every citizen that participated in the process that's not here. For every one of you that is here, you probably represent 5 or 6 or 7 members of your family or your neighborhood or your circle. So of the 250 people that were participated and attended, it probably represented 1,000 people or maybe even more to understand what we're trying to do. I would like to really commend the city staff. The city manager, Mark McDaniel, was the one that was instrumental in getting this process started and letting us know how important it is. The staff that worked with him, EA and Mike and Stuart and the planning and Drew and everyone needs to realize that we have a spectacular city staff that does a tremendous job every day for us to make this city a better place for us to live. And I think this plan represents, it may be a 2050 plan, but the plan that we have is really taken into account the people that live in this city today, the people that live in this city tomorrow, the retirement community that is here that has helped this city become what it is. We've watched the population grow. We're happy to see young people come in, but this city was built and is represented by the older generation, whether we like it or not, of which I'm a part of. And I'm very proud to be a part of this plan. I highly endorse it. I think that anything that comes up in the future will go to the city council. We have a tremendous city leadership, and I have full confidence in the mayor and the city council that anything that comes up that has to be addressed or has to be looked at, I'm very confident they'll do the right thing, and I'm just so proud of this community and this city, this government and this staff for getting us to this point.
Rustin?
It was a great process. I'm honored to be a part of it. One thing that I really liked about the process was that each action item, and I don't know how many there are, Mark. Do you know how many action items?
A bunch.
Okay, all right. Each one of those went through a subcommittee, and it was a unanimous vote in that subcommittee to bring it forward. So that's, to me, meant a lot to hear that. But I endorse it. I support it. It's a good plan. I don't know that I would have chosen every single word in this plan exactly how it's written, but I don't think that's what this plan is about. So I do believe that everyone that wanted to be involved in this plan got some form of input, and I feel I got a little bit of input in there, and so I support it.
Thank you. David?
This is indeed a plan. A plan has a life of its own and whatever else going forward, but plans take two directions in my experience. If you have a bureaucracy, a plan is a place to something to hide behind and say, oh, we can't do that because of. As has been said, I have complete faith in Mark and the city staff, having worked with them and whatever else, that we are going to see implementation of quite a bit of this plan. And Ms. Stewart, for those concerns that you have about specific things like that, you know, you have the comfort of saying, no, wait, that's not what the plan says. The plan says that we're going to take these things into consideration, and we're going to come and we're going to look at it. And I've never seen a Nazi in Kerrville in my 20 or 30, 40 years around, so it's not going to happen. Those things, and you're going to be able to see, I believe, and the staff, the council will have to hold the staff to the requirements of what have you done on the plan today, and what are you going to do tomorrow, and how are we moving this thing forward. And I think that we have the maturity as a community to see this and to look after it and whatever else. That planning is always difficult, and any of you have heard the story of the plan many times goes south on the first day of its action. So then you have to have flexibility and you have to move to something else. And there's enough action items in this plan, you can always at least move over to another action item. But seriously, I see it and totally endorse it, and have spent quite a bit of time on it, and I feel that we've got something that we can really move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you. We started talking about this about 2 years ago, and it kind of scared me because they told us that the Planning and Zoning Commission had the responsibility to do that. And I started, when I moved to Kerrville in 2001, I sat in on that comprehensive plan situation. I did the studies and sat there and listened, learning about this community. Now, I've watched it for 17 years. We revamped this back in 2008. I think our charge is, this is really a dynamic plan, which means it's going to change based on circumstances. And I think it's our responsibility, and I would charge this commission, the city, with really the need for periodic reviews, maybe more often than every 8 or 10 years. I think it's good to see where we are. You know, in my business, you have to have a plan, you have goals, you have action plans, but you have to go back and see where you are. And so I think accountabilities and responsibilities need to be evaluated periodically. There is a lot of low-hanging fruit that's not going to cost us a lot of money to get things done. I like the transparency factor. That's something that I believe in. And without that, I don't think you really have a true community. You don't want to be guided and led by something that's not transparent in all you do. I can't give enough credit to Mark and his consulting team for all the work they did. You know, thank goodness you were here. And you had a great methodology and continuity, and they've done a lot of work, especially in the last 90 days to get this thing together. I think I've made all the meetings. I didn't make all the subcommittee meetings, but I kept abreast of what was going on. And there was a natural flow. What I saw at the public meetings is people looking at maps and proposals for different scenarios. And then people, they really started having conversations, and all that was taken into consideration. The next meeting we had, those maps looked different because all that input was taken into consideration. You know, I told my wife I was going to live to 105, and that's what I'd be in 2050. But I trust that the things that we're doing, that we've done for the last 9 months, and what we'll hopefully do today and get the ratification of the council down the road and get started, it's like planting a tree. You know, we're not going to be the ones usually that sit in the shade of that tree. It's going to be somebody else. And so I think I couldn't have asked for a better plan. I especially like the involvement of everybody. I got comments for the last year on different things. Every time something came out, there was a question, and we got it answered. And the city staff has done a super job of keeping us where we need to be. You know, this, we talked about getting into the ETJ. We talked about, you know, going Center Point, those things. We didn't just do this plan or ask for input just for the city limits. We know that things overlap. We know that if in 2020 we're at 25,000, at ETJ it goes to 2 miles instead of 1 mile. And we're very considerate of that. I think this plan really started out different than I thought. I thought it was going to be, let's move out But once we got this plan started, it was really to work with what we have and maximize that potential. And I really think that that's what we're going to do. So I can't say enough. Open discussions, modifications, and Mark, your team did a super job of guiding us through, and we appreciate it. I won't say you're underpaid. But you did do a super job. Okay, now I'll ask for any comments from the commission before I ask for a motion.
I'm good to go.
I'm good.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion, we approve this plan to send to the city council as submitted.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. It passes 5-0. Thank you. And thank y'all for your participation. Now we'll go to the next item, which is 3B, public hearing and resolution. Public hearing and consideration of a resolution concerning a requested conditional use permit to add an apartment unit to the existing single-family residential use on Lot 6, Block 6, Richards Addition, located at 1620 First Street, file number 2018-024.
I'm gonna wait till the doors get closed.
We'll wait. I'll let everybody.
Not a problem.
That's a good session.
Do you know her name? Do you need Carolyn's name?
Carolyn, there you
Since
go.
she didn't,
Yeah.
she's incognito.
You ready for Drew?
Ready?
Okay, Drew.
Okay. This case came before the Planning Commission a couple meetings back. Ms. Klink was looking to, or has reconstructed a shed, into an apartment in the backyard. At the last Planning Commission meeting, we heard from some of the adjacent neighbors, and there were some concerns on whether or not the structure would be capable of meeting the building code. Ms. Klink did come in and talk with the building official. He went out and visited the site, looked at the property, believes that it is possible for it to meet the building code. There will be more work that needs to be done on the property, both this structure and one of the adjacent structures. But it is capable of meeting the building code as an apartment. The adjacent area is all zoned R1. Excuse me, let me go through my slides too. This is on First Street. Here's the site plan of the property showing the main house, the small shed, and then the apartment behind that. Here's some photographs of the shed, or excuse me, the apartment. There are currently 2 parking spaces there on First Street. Access would can be from First Street and through the main property. And the apartment is allowed as a conditional use, which goes through this commission and then of course to the city council. That's all we have.
Okay, this 3B also requires a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing at 6:04. Anybody wishing to make a statement to this commission, please step to the lectern and let us have your name and address, please. I have a speaker request form from Julie Klink. Whoever wants to go first.
Hello again. My name is Kathy Wilson. I live at 117 Crestwood, and we own the home next to this property. We've lived in Kerrville for 35 years. We've owned 4 houses. We are business owners, and we've raised our family here. So I appreciate all that Kerrville has to offer. I'm going to kind of go through this because it'll help me keep my thoughts in order. On the sheet here, it says, if approved, it'll be required to go back to the zoning board for setback variances. I think since it's already a conditional use item, I don't know why there should be additional variances because it's already a conditional use. You talked about planting a tree and someone else would be using it, and that is typical of an apartment type thing also. It's currently being built for family members, but what is it going to be in the future? There is no way to control that, and with property next door, I don't know who I will have as neighbors in the future. We look at several areas of the town that need to be rebuilt or brought up to different standards because they weren't held to any certain specs, and if we control it now, we won't have to do that in the coming years. Unified is a word that comes to mind for that because it should be similar through the town. And it's not the highest neighborhood, but it is higher values on that area than some of the other property values. You call it an apartment, but it really is a shed. There's 2 sheds in the backyard. We have a shed in our backyard. I guess with this conditional use, we could put an apartment in our backyard also. But then there's another variance. The building was put in without a permit, so it's too close to the fence in the back, so they have to give a variance for that. It was not connected to the public sewer system. And let's see, there was something else. The terrain hasn't changed, but it's an additional number of people living there. So the parking is a problem. It states that it wouldn't increase it, but it has. And Ms. Klink has argued that next to us there is a halfway house, and there is. They are quiet. We've not had any disturbances from them, but it was also a home which changed into a halfway house before there was requirements placed on that type of structure. So there are a lot of things to consider with that, and I hope you will look at it as possible setting precedents for the future for other areas in town.
Okay, and you live directly adjacent?
I do
this
not.
property?
We own that home, and my daughter
You
is
lease
currently
it? Okay.
my daughter currently lives there.
Okay.
She was considering buying it, but she does not want to continue that
Okay.
thought. So it will be, it will change the value of my investment.
Which direction from the?
We live on, it's 1621, I'm sorry. So it's right next door.
Is it the side closest to the proposed apartment or the other side?
We're right next to it.
Right next to
Yeah.
it, okay.
Yeah. There are also animals too that come into play. And so at the last meeting, we talked about a fence that would help, but it's visible from other neighbors also. And so just considering that that's something that's going to set precedents for Kerrville and other buildings. I currently live on the other side of town, but given this opportunity, I could probably put an apartment shed in my backyard, and I don't know that property values would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Klink?
Julie Klink, and my address is 1620 First Street. And this is a tiny house. It is not a shed. It doesn't look super duper because construction and updates have stopped per city order. Once it's done, it's going to be cute as a button and neat as a pin. And eventually we're going to paint the house to go with that, the big house. I have gotten an estimate for plumbing. I have consulted with someone about moving the shed that's next to mine to meet that variance between my apartment and I have received information about the insulation as far as construction is concerned. And I would request that my submission be approved, grandma me in, granddad me, and shut the door. This I applied before your big plan was instituted, and I don't know what else to say except I do not believe it will reduce anybody's property value. What would reduce the property value is having 2 rehab places on the same street. And then we have drug houses down at the other end of our street. And at that halfway house that is next to my neighbor, police have been called numerous times over the past for disturbances, fights, trouble. And I don't care. They take care of it and it's done. But I don't feel like an enemy to anybody. I don't want to put anybody down for their thing. I don't care if they put an apartment in their backyard, that's cool, whatever. And I don't think that would devalue my property either. So, if you want to see anything of the paperwork that I brought, you're welcome to, but I don't know if that's your concern or what. So.
Not at this point, I don't think.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Anybody else to make comments during the public hearing session? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carolyn Lipscomb, 909 Lake Drive, Kerrville, Texas. And one of the things that I would like to speak to has to do with this. As I understand it, Kerrville does not really, we have zoning that it's single-family neighborhoods. And my experience has been, for the most part, it means nothing because our ordinances, as I understand it, do not define what a family is. And so we have a situation where a lot of the single-family homes in our neighborhood are rented and inhabited by as many as 4 and 6 people, all with vehicles, when a lot of these homes are a 1-car garage and a 1 driveway. And so both sides of the street are lined with cars. And I personally think, number one, it's a safety hazard because the emergency vehicles, if you've got anybody coming up one way, somebody's got to pull over or pull into a drive if you can get to one to let the, because you can't have 2 cars going down the street at the same time. And I personally see this, it's gotten much worse in our area from when we purchased our property. And I think it's important, as Mrs. Wilson has said, that when you buy a property and you bought it knowing that it was a single-family neighborhood, that there should be some kind of protection there, but there is not.
A very
Thank you.
valid point, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
This property is actually zoned R1C. The C meaning it's possible to have conditional use permission.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is. That's the whole purpose of this. If it wasn't, I don't think we'd be talking about this. Any other comments on the public hearing? Hearing none, seeing none, I close the public hearing at 6:16. Comments from the commissioners?
I have some questions for you, Drew.
Okay.
Addressing this, if this conditional use permit is granted, then they still have to go for variances for setbacks,
That is
for
correct.
sidewalks. And what I'm reading here, I'm not understanding, is this meeting the parking requirement? It does not, does it?
I'd have to double check the width of the lot. I couldn't read the survey.
Because what I'm reading here is it requires a minimum of 3 parking spaces, 2 of which can be in front. Is that what it says?
Yes.
And there's no way there can be a parking space in the back where this apartment is, correct?
That's correct.
So
We talked about the parking before.
Right.
I think
I'm
it's
just trying to
adequate.
figure out,
I agree.
why wouldn't all these other variances be approached before we would grant this? Does this have to be?
Right. This has to come first.
Okay.
Because the parking and the setback are not an issue if the apartment is not approved.
Okay.
As an accessory building, it meets the setbacks
So
where
we
it is.
approve this, instantly, everything else becomes an issue.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we have that scheduled for the zoning board of adjustment following this and city council approval. If it is not approved, then it
Right,
will not go
yeah.
to the board of adjustment.
So that's what it means by all those other setbacks and variances, that it doesn't exist now, but exists if approved.
Correct.
Okay.
And also, if approved, have to go through the building permit process to finish out the remainder of the apartment according to the building code.
Do you have any concerns about opening the floodgate? If we approve this as a conditional use permit and everybody decides they want to put an apartment, do you have a concern about that?
As the conditional use to be looked at case by
Case
case
by
through the
case.
public hearing process, certainly looking at those standards of parking and setbacks, materials, and so on. So I wouldn't say that it's opening the floodgates. That we may get more requests, but again, case by case through that public hearing process.
Mr. Hayes, do we have an issue if we grant this conditional use permit and the neighbor across the street and the neighbor down the street come and say, well, I'd like to put an apartment because I can rent it out?
This is the question that I get asked probably more than anything, other than, are we going to get sued or are we going to be liable? You'd have to treat people similarly situated the same way. But I think it's you all have discretion to apply different things and different conditions as you're working through that today. A couple thoughts. When I first got here, gas stations, fuel stations had to go through a process, and I can't remember if it was a conditional use permit or a specific zoning, and we would apply lots of conditions. But then the technology got better, and the conditions lessened, and so that's one example. In this case, I mean, more and more, you can make an argument, there are more and more people trying to get this kind of use. So I'm sitting over there, and we've just come off the comprehensive plan, and that's probably something, no doubt, that the folks that consider the new zoning code are going to take into account, because these accessory uses, these accessory buildings are becoming more prevalent. And so, you know, this body, whether it's y'all sitting here or your successors in interest, are probably going to have to go through a process and go, okay, how is that going to work in the future in terms of setbacks and conditions and parking and all those things. The only other comment I'll make is this is a normal process. People most of the time want to know that they can do the use before they build the building.
Right.
So you give them the use, you authorize the use, and then no doubt we will tie the variance into that conditional use permit, which is a resolution. Well, you know, they got to meet the setbacks. They got to, you know, get that variance. They got to make the parking. They got to. That structure has to have a certificate of occupancy, which means that Brian has to go over there and make sure it's livable and it meets the codes. All that's going to be in there. So this is just kind of the beginning of her process.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my comments, had this come to us for a variance, for a conditional use permit prior to the unit being put in the backyard, with plans to have proper septic, wastewater, water, electricity, insulation, and all of that. Had adequate parking been provided, had it, you know, been within all the proper setbacks and so forth, I think it might have been a different situation. You know, I know for a fact your family's not the only family in Kerrville that has the problem of space inside their house. And there's other people have to solve that different ways. I have a concern, even though they have to come back here each time for a conditional use permit, that it's almost creating an implied
approval.
No, a precedent is what I'm saying. Even though it's not an actual precedent, you know, it's going to be harder for us to come back. Somebody that actually goes out and says, here's what I want to do. I've gone to the city. Here's what I need to do. I'm going to build something that meets all the codes, and us turning them down. I just think there's just too many negatives. I'm very appreciative of the circumstances. I think it's something that you're going to have to deal with, other than making this storage building a quote apartment on the property for people to inhabit overnight.
Did you close the public hearing?
Yes.
You did? Okay, I missed it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Other comments?
My thoughts, I'm not opposed to apartments. I think they can enhance a property if they're done correctly. But I think that burden to show us that it's going to be done correctly has to be met.
I agree that an apartment on a property can, if done like with the spec, like, you know, gone through the city, done the correct way, if the property's big enough to allow that for parking and for, you know, natural size of the lots, if you will. Because I know personally, I've looked at mine, and it's like, you know, with similar situation with a family down the road or in-laws, that like if we could do something, you know, and I think that it's something that it's worth looking into, but I think that it's about the approach a lot of the times, and I think that this would be, I think the word's been used, precedent, and I think that this would be very difficult for future commissioners if this is used. Again, it's not maybe it's not law, they can't cite law in terms of this, but they can definitely pull up this video and go, it's been approved before. And that's gonna be very tough in the future.
You know, my concern is, and I understand what comes into effect once this is approved. If we approve this conditional use permit subject to a bunch of variances and send it to the ZAB, it kind of leads them to believe we approve this with these issues. I think it's like Rustin said, if I want to build an apartment in my backyard and I come up with a plan and I go to the P&Z and I've got a plan that shows where everything's going to be, I'm meeting all the requirements that are required, I'm meeting the parking, I'm meeting the setbacks, I'm meeting everything, I run that through pretty quickly because it meets everything to approve a conditional use permit. But I mean, we're sending a message to the next person that has to approve it. Yeah, we approve it. You know, we don't, you know, you guys do. That's my concern. I mean, I think that it's an issue.
Any other comments? If not, I'll ask for a motion. Hearing none, this is denied for lack of a motion. If that's the proper.
You really need to take one of the actions. And I think you put that slide back up there. Yeah. That's in our code, and so you need to take approval, denial, tabling, or approval with conditions.
Okay, so you can make.
I'll go ahead and make a motion. I'll make a motion, we deny this request.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. All in favor, raise your right hand. This is denied. Thank you. 5-0. Staff report.
Have the comprehensive plan going to City Council with your recommendation next Tuesday. Meeting starts at 6 p.m. And then from there, we'll kind of get some marching orders for what our next projects are.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome aboard, Drew.
Thank you.
And there's also a meeting, what, on the 26th or so at Calhoun
Yes,
Theater?
thank you. The second reading for City Council will be 26th at the Calhoun Theater. That'll be the second reading, final vote for adoption, and everybody's welcome.
Okay, any other business before this commission today? If not, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Have the motion, second?
Second.
All in favor? Passes 5-0, we're adjourned.